So hey anime fans, the series name is What If Naruto Got Harem with Kurenai, so let's start the series. Naruto didn't believe the first time he was called a demon because he was just like them. He ultimately came to believe it to be genuine, though, as more and more people continued to refer to him as such. He even grinned at the villagers when they dubbed him a demon. Everyone eventually started referring to him as such, and he took offense if they called him Naruto. The demon's smile and the way he responded when they said it were what made everyone frightened, not the nine-tailed fox. They tried to get a rise out of him by taunting him and calling him various names, but it was all in vain. They exerted every effort to annoy him. Each and every night they kept him up. He had only slept a little since the 11th day, just enough to keep his body energetic, but his pals were still there, which made them even more afraid of him when he started talking to people who weren't there, hallucinations. At the age of 8, he was arguably the most dreaded individual in the village, and he had done nothing at all. Soon, the Jounin would fear him even more, and perhaps the Hokage would as well. Because they were too afraid of Naruto, no one had ever attempted to harm him. However, one villager had found the bravery to try and slay the demon in disguise today. He felt somewhat uneasy when he saw the child strolling down the street and his eyes catching a glimpse of an invisible entity. He inhaled deeply before approaching Naruto as though nothing was amiss. As Naruto was walking by, he produced a kunai and cut it across the demon's forearm. "Take that, you filthy demon." Naruto merely grinned at the man before focusing on his arm and savoring this odd new feeling. After trembling at Naruto's expression, the man fled, stopping to explain what had transpired. Naruto watched in awe as the red liquid sprayed on the ground and trickled down the man's arm after he had left. Perhaps he was meant to consume it. Naruto shrugged, raised his arm to his lips, and then slowly licked the wound, tasting the crimson fluid. After tasting it and deciding it was fairly delicious, the blood quickly went away from the wound, leaving only the unpleasant cut on his forearm. When the devil realized no one was nearby, he turned around and went home, all the while informing his companions about this fantastic drink he had discovered. Sarutobi gazed through his crystal ball with a sorrowful sigh. Asuma Sarutobi, Hatake Kakashi, Mado Gai, and Yuhi Kurenai had gathered around him. They all appeared repulsed by the show they had just witnessed. Kakashi turned to face the elderly guy, who was looking bored. "You're not going to put him in the academy, are you?" he lazily replied. "The boy is obviously mentally ill." Sarutobi turned to look at him gravely. "Yes, I am. He will go through the academy program, like the other children his age." Even Guy was uncertain as he turned his attention from the ball to Sarutobi's eyes. Ignoring his rival's expression, he went on, "I think Kakashi's right for a change. His behavior could affect the other children, and their performance." "You might be right," said Sarutobi, nodding, "but I'm going to give him a chance." Sarutobi peeped on the other genin to see what they were doing, and the 4 jounin nodded before turning back to the crystal ball. I wonder if he can peep at the hot springs with that." Naruto moaned as he sulked about his apartment. He had no money, no ramen, and he was hungry. Yes, there were moments when life was bitch. He could talk to his buddies, of course, but eventually he wanted to do something different. He recalled the taste of his blood after being slashed by that kind man. It might taste even better this way. He examined the cut on his arm slowly before biting into it and beginning to eat it, enjoying its rich flavor. Weeks after the fact. Today marked the beginning of the younger generation's shinobi training. As the monster strolled along the street, people stared at him with disdain. When they saw that his right arm had several pieces removed, the majority of them puked. It seemed as though something had attempted to devour his arm. But they realized what had happened to his arm when they noticed him munching on something that was bloody and mixed with flesh. He had recently received a higher rating on the fear scale, and as he passed, everyone retreated from him. Naruto veered off course and went to the right after spotting the little blue building and his target. The parents looked at his arm with interest when they first saw him, then turned away in disgust and warned their kids to avoid that creature. Casually, he approached the elderly man and a man with a scar over his nose. The Hokage greeted him with a grin, then hurried to his side after taking a quick look at his forearm. "Naruto, what the hell happened?" the man cried. "Nothing, old man, I was hungry, and it looked so good, I couldn't help myself." Sarutobi looked at Naruto in awe. He should not be doing this, he was hungry, and he had food, damn it. "What happened to the food, and money I gave you?" In response, Naruto said, "Gone." As he stared at Naruto's arm, the old man sighed. He couldn't possibly cure it, and he didn't think the medics could either. Why wasn't the fox treating him? The next chap will tell you. "Is there any pain?" Sarutobi inquired. Naruto responded, "No. Actually, it feels good." When he couldn't uncover proof that he was lying, the Sandaime swore as he looked at him. "Ha, we'll talk later, okay?" Ignoring the children's ill looks at his arm, Naruto nodded before entering the academy. Iruka glanced at each of his new pupils and grinned a little. If he passed the entire class, it would be good for his record, so hopefully they would all become genin. Then perhaps he would at last be a jounin. All he could do was pray and hope. The boy with the blonde hair in the upper right corner of the classroom caught Iruka's attention. That was the devil. He mouthed the word monster while frowning at the youngster. The youngster simply waved and grinned at him. Stunned, Iruka shook his head and started speaking to the class. Additionally, 2 hours later, less than half of the class was listening to Iruka's lecture on the shinobi code. Naruto couldn't wait till lunch, which was in 30 minutes. He looked around to make sure no one was watching, then he bit his arm and dropped his head beneath the desk. When Naruto heard a screech, he looked up to see the blonde girl across from him pointing at him and yelling that he was a freak. After thanking her, he was about to take another bite when he saw that everyone was looking at him in disgust. Some of them even spilled their stomach contents over the ground. 5 minutes later, Iruka seized him and pulled him outdoors. The Hokage appeared along with a few women wearing uneven ponytails and purple hair. Naruto's body heated up and his insides tingled as he gazed at the women. The woman smirked and walked closer to Naruto after noticing him licking his bleeding arm while blushing and staring at her. Anko knelt down and tasted the child's blood with a small lick. She began to lick it again, and her eyebrows shot up in amazement. She glanced at him once the blood had stopped flowing and noticed that he was grinning at her. Before returning to the Hokage's location, Anko gave him a forehead kiss. Yes, she did enjoy this child. After giving Naruto a somber glance, the Hokage grabbed him and hurried off to his office. A day later, X days later. I've dropped him off at his apartment, and got the medics to fix his arm, with the new regeneration experiment. After giving a nod, the jounin turned to face Sarutobi. I can't leave him alone, he'll destroy himself, in this state. Their eyes were filled with recognition as they gazed at him. It was Asuma who raised her voice. You don't mean, one of us? The senior Sarutobi nodded, confirming their assumptions. That's correct, he will live with one of you. That can't be me, I'm too busy and wouldn't be able to watch over him, Kakashi said, looking up from his book. Asuma replied, I can't either, Konohamaru, and mission would take up my entire time. Guy then said, I'm sorry, but I can't. I have to watch over my own son, and training to beat Kakashi. They all turned to stare at Kurenai as she remained silent. I guess, I could watch over him, and protect him. Thankful that someone would be keeping an eye on Naruto, Sarutobi grinned at her. The following day, as Naruto entered her home, Kurenai grinned at him while her eyes scanned the entire room, taking in everything at once. He nodded his satisfaction, and she grinned once again. However, when she felt her underwear get wet, her smile vanished. Since Asuma left her 4 months ago, she has been experiencing sexual cravings, which she couldn't deny. Naruto turned to face her, seemingly oblivious to the change in her. Where is my room? He inquired impassively. Kurenai grinned at Naruto and tried to ignore the moisture between his thighs as she said, it's down the hall and to the left. She hurried to the bathroom, closed the door, took off the bandages, and started giving herself the finger and pointing as Naruto went in that direction. Kurenai attempted to suppress her groans, but was unsuccessful as the jounin began to grunt and groan. She heard the door open and vaguely felt her fluids flowing down her palm. When she turned to face the entrance, she paused and noticed Naruto standing there, staring at her with awe. He licked his lips as he glanced down at her legs and the space between them. She was stunned as he approached her and pushed her legs aside to give him a good look at her femininity. Unconsciously, her legs encircled him, bringing him nearer. In preparation to taste it, he lowered his head and widened his mouth. Kurenai was unaware that this was incorrect on numerous levels. All she knew was that the sexual tension she had been carrying around for the previous few months would finally be released. She groaned more than ever when his lips met hers, causing shock to run through her body. Her delight was short-lived, though, as he sucked on her womanhood before standing up and cleaning his mouth. It tastes pretty good, but not as good as my blood. Kurenai sat up and approached him, looking him in the eye without even readjusting her bandages. What just happened will never leave this house, understand? After she entered her room and closed the door after he nodded, Naruto shrugged and went to the kitchen to get a knife, one of his favorite things. For example, Naruto felt a weight on top of him and woke up with a start. He witnessed Yuhi Kurenai pulling down his pants while nude. "Wha are you doin'?" he muttered restlessly. "Shoo. It's okay, I'm just going to pay you back, for what you did today." He murmured, looking at her with interest, okay." She was astonished as she pulled down his boxers. "Wow, that's pretty big for someone your age." It wasn't until she was standing above him that Naruto spoke. "What if I don't want you to do this?" As she slipped down and allowed his member to penetrate her, the jounin exhaled. She slid up and down on him and said, "Well, that's too bad because, I'm your guardian, and, you have to do what I say." He had to confess that it felt great to just sit there as she did. She chuckled as he slowly raised his hands and stroked her nipples, saying, "That's good, don't stop." In order to obtain a taste, he bit into them as she requested. He quickly reached her thighs with his hands and began rubbing them together with her bobbing motion, making her work more harder and causing her to groan louder and more than before. He urged her to stop when it began to ache after a few minutes. He asked her again when she didn't. She simply advised him to unwind and relish the journey. She slapped him across the face when he attempted to push her away. "Stop, this isn't for you anymore, Naruto. You better be ready for this every night, 'cause you're my only means of release." The pain of her bouncing taking advantage of him caused him to groan before he covered his face with the pillow and tried to stop the tears from streaming down his face. Naruto kept the incident a secret from everyone. Additionally, he kept the nights that followed and any subsequent occasions in which his guardian exploited him a secret from them. He suppressed and bottled up his pain and rage. Furthermore, the consequences of overfilling a container are well known. It would eventually blow up and spill all of its contents over everyone. Kurenai entered his room once more and locked the door, and Naruto sighed. After finishing her meal, Anko had nothing to do, so she sighed as she left the dango store. She couldn't help but think of that boy she had seen at the academy. He was kind of cute, and she had to admit that his blood tasted extremely nice. As she made her way to Kurenai's residence, she couldn't help but think about that vivid red blood. It was unbelievable to her that she was attracted to a young child. Anko knew something wasn't right when she arrived at Kurenai's house. Not to add the odd sounds emanating from the house's rear. Kurenai and the child might have been, no. To make sure they heard, she shook her head and rapped loudly on the door. X. As she gently removed herself from Naruto and placed her clothing back on, the genjutsu mistress swore. She suppressed the ache of remorse that was brewing inside of her as she looked at Naruto. With a sigh, Kurenai approached the door cautiously and opened it for Anko, her best friend. "At Kurenai," said Jounin grinned. With a sly smile, she said, "What are you doing?" "What are you doing?" she inquired. "Ah, nothing, why?" "Well, I came to see you and the kid, especially the kid." "Oh, a minute," Kurenai said, freezing. When she rushed to Naruto's room, she noticed that he was attempting to contain his tears. "Listen, Anko is here to see us, so I expect that you won't break your promise, will you?" she said, shaking her head and taking hold of his arm. She swiftly took her arm out of Naruto's line of sight when she noticed that he was staring at it ravenously. "Do you understand?" She stepped back to the door, where Anko was sleeping, after he nodded. She caught Anko by the sleeve of her coat and drew her in. Anko took off her coat as soon as she entered, then sat on the couch and talked with Kurenai about the child and other men in the hamlet. God, I wish the fourth was still alive, he had a huge sack on him. After giving herself a forehead slap, Kurenai said she needed to see how Naruto was doing. Returning to his room, she was shocked to see him cutting himself and swallowing the blood as though it were his final meal. He's doing that again. When she noticed that Anko had been leaning over her shoulder, she jumped, turned around, and put her palm to her heart. After giving her a wry glance, Anko entered the room and settled down next to Naruto on the bed. After a minute of staring at her, Naruto held up his arm and said, "For me, thanks." After feeling nauseous, Kurenai went into the kitchen and tried to force her lunch back into her stomach. Naruto and Anko were a perfect match. Anko licked his arm and said, "So kid, how's your life going here?" As he sliced again, Anko smiled and said, "It's good." "Are you sure she's not hurting you or anything?" she asked him after pausing and turning to face him. He twitched slightly, but Anko saw it. "What is she doing to you?" He spoke shakily. Nothing, she's not doing anything to me." "Look, kid, it's okay, you can tell me," and I won't tell her I know, Anko said, staring at him. She's using me, gasped Naruto as he jumped into her embrace. When Anko realized Naruto was telling the truth, she cursed after gasping and meeting his eyes. Don't worry, Naruto. I'll get you out of here, okay? She said, wrapping her arms around him. After giving her a nod, he released her. Anko licked the blood off his mouth after kissing him. When he nodded, she stood up, patted his hair, and walked back into the living room where Kurenai was. Anko refrained from insulting her directly. I'll be back tomorrow, so be ready, and act like everything is normal. I have to leave, but I'll be back tomorrow. See you then. Kurenai went into the kitchen to prepare dinner after waving at her as she left. She had no idea that Anko was aware of it or that Naruto would be departing tomorrow. Perhaps he simply accepted life as it was. It was more stranger when she completed her nightly round with Naruto and he was genuinely assisting her and exploring with his hands. She cleared her brain before returning to her work with Naruto. With a sigh, Anko entered the Hokage's office and closed the door. The Sandaime grinned at her as he glanced up from his paperwork. What can I do for you, Anko? I think you need to move Uzumaki, Naruto to another home, she said, glancing around anxiously. She said. Oh, and why should I do that? He said, tinkering with his cap. I have grounds to suspect that he is being harassed. What proof do you have? Sarutobi asked, rising to his feet and standing directly in front of her. He inquired gravely. Yes, none, but I've seen that he behaves strangely around her. He defended himself as she passed him in the hallway until he realized I was there. She told a lie. I want you to go there tomorrow and prove that it's happening. Get whatever evidence you can, and ask Naruto questions until he admits it, the third Hokage said, nodding. Good, I'm glad you noticed, otherwise this would have kept happening, he said with a smile when she nodded. At 4 o'clock in the morning, Naruto's dream world. Naruto got up, opened his eyes, and gasped when he saw that he was standing on a platform with millions of people cheering and applauding below him. He waved his left arm and smiled at everyone before a sudden burst of white light appeared, and then all of the people were dead, sliced into bloody, gory pieces of flesh and bone. Oh, he enjoyed this dream. Naruto's white outfit was now stained with blood, and he held a blue, triple-bladed scythe in his right hand. He glanced at the weapon, then laughed at the heaps of victims. He then went over and picked up a head and bit into it. He heard ominous laughter out of nowhere, and as he looked up, he saw a large cage with a gigantic fox inside. However, keep in mind, after giving the fox a quick glance and then taking another bite out of its head, Naruto stopped eating and peered at it, grinning when he heard the fox laugh. 9 tails, large crimson eyes, razor-sharp teeth, and a terrible chuckle. You are the Kyuubi, indeed. After staring at Naruto in disbelief, the Kyuubi said, You're not terrified of me? He inquired as to why Naruto shook his head. Because you're in a sealed cage and are therefore powerless, and because you're simply amazing. I'm glad you noticed, the fox said with a smile. I like you human, not only are you not scared, you are smart, and you like human flesh, Kyuubi said, breaking the silence. I have a nice container. With a simulated bow, Naruto said, thank you. Before settling into a posture, the Kyuubi moved around in its cage. So you enjoyed that dream, huh? Hell yeah, it was cool, and I got to eat, and that big-ass scythe was the shit, Naruto said, nodding. We'll get along just fine, the fox said with a broad, toothy smile. It's time for you to wake up, by the way. It was black everywhere, and then Naruto felt a hand shake him. At 5 in the morning. Get up, youngster, please. Naruto sat up, turned to face the women in front of him, and grinned as he recognized Anko, who grinned back at him with her signature smile. Come on, let's leave and visit the Hokage so you can explain the situation to him. No, I can't, Naruto said, shaking his head, because I want to punish her myself and I won't have anywhere else to live. We'll find you a place to live, and what's a little kid like you going to do, said Anko, taking his hand. I'll make it worthwhile for you, so please don't tell anyone. You'll find out shortly. After giving him a weird look, Anko chuckled softly and said, what's a tiny kid like you going to do to a giant woman like me? I may be small, but why do you think Kurenai keeps returning? He said with a sly smile. Stopping her laughter, Anko turned to face him and stated, I thought she's taking advantage of you. It's true that she is, but she keeps doing it, 'cause she likes my size. Well, I've always wanted to do a little kid, but no one knows, right? Anko shook her head. Yeah, and then I have to live with you, he said, nodding his head. And why did you assume that you'll live with me? She asked, glancing at him. He laughed at her. 'Cause if I don't then I'll just go to the Hokage, and say child molestation, and bang you'll be locked up. She yelled at him, stupid, blackmailing, little fine, but after that, when I want blood you'll have to, give me some okay? He grinned and nodded. Gladly, I'm glad you accepted my offer, 'cause you're nice, and beautiful, and I'd hate for you to be in jail. She smiled at him gently before recognizing his words, just come on, so we can get it over with. After Naruto nodded, they leaped out the window and entered the forest, with the woman not understanding why she accepted and the boy not understanding why he offered himself to her. What had begun as sex had finally developed to something far more primitive, and it was nasty and twisted. As he pumped in and out of her, Naruto sunk his fangs into her shoulder. She did the same to Anko's wrist, but he didn't appear to mind. You would throw up your organs if you saw it. He continued to peel skin from her abdomen, like a possessed demon, and soon they were having intercourse on a heap of their own blood and flesh. Even though it was repulsive and sick, they both found twisted pleasure in it. After 20 minutes, Naruto was left to speak to the fox when Anko put on her jacket and said, "Ha, not bad kid, I'll tell the old man to let you live with me, after I heal my wounds. Keep in mind, hee, not bad kid, I knew we were gonna get along great." After circling Naruto's body, the crimson chakra healed him. He gave the fox a grateful smile before his face took on a humorous expression. Wait, how come you've never healed me before? Because I was sleeping, when I got sealed, the damn thing took all my energy, and used it to seal me, so I was recuperating. When you had that dream, that was when I woke up, and decided to test you. Oh, how did I do? Inquired Naruto. With a menacing smile, the fox said, "Oh, you passed with flying colors." Naruto nodded before being thrown out of his head and discovering that he was standing in front of the window at Kurenai's house once more. Well, I didn't even realize I was back here. Naruto closed the window, went to eat in the kitchen, and then proceeded to check Kurenai still asleep, barely hearing the fox's voice because he wasn't thinking about him. I assumed she woke up early, around 7 o'clock. Why normally she does get up at that time, last night wore her out even more. So that's why you let her keep going last night, and even started helping her. The fox laughed, smart boy. Naruto woke Kurenai up when there was a knock on the door because he could feel the fox withdrawing into the shadowy corners of his thoughts. She stood up, turned to face him, heard the door open, put on a shirt and shorts, hurried to the door, and opened it hastily. Anko, Sarutobi, and Irika were standing in her doorway, and she gaped. She said, can I help you three? With a tinge of rage in his voice, Sarutobi nodded and continued, yes, we heard rumors that you were doing nasty things to Naruto. Kurenai stared at the three of them, then turned to look at Naruto before saying, I'm sorry, but whatever you've heard is obviously not true, as you can see. Maybe, but we just think that there should be some steps taken just in case, Irika said when it was her turn to speak. Yeah, and I hope you aren't doing anything to him, 'cause if you are, you'll be taken to prison, said Anko. Well, we'll look into this more, but for now, Naruto will stay with Anko, said Sarutobi, gesturing for Naruto to stand behind him. Kurenai glanced at each of them before turning to face Naruto, who was standing behind them. She blinked when he gave her a scowl and then grinned. She became enraged on the inside, but not enough for others to notice. When the Hokage informed her that he would return later, she nodded. They departed after that, and she destroyed everything in the training room before closing the door. Yes, she would force that brat to pay. 1 week later, the Anko's house. Naruto was exhausted after returning from the academy. The children had to spar with one another today, and they were all so afraid of him that they refused to approach him. The children, terrified that the monster was assaulting them, simply tried to flee and hide as he brought the fight to them and ran at them. Consequently, Naruto ultimately defeated them all, and Irika noted on Naruto's record that he was the strongest and best in taijutsu. Good times. Anko and Naruto continued to have fun at home, and occasionally she did it when he didn't want to. He didn't really care, though, as long as it was with someone he loved. As his companion stared in shock at what Anko was doing to him, he grinned. Anko gave Naruto a smile before he left, but she cursed at the child after he left. Yes, he was excellent in bed, his blood tasted delicious, and they had a terrific relationship, yet he scared her. It was fine to drink blood, but to consume your own fat, muscles, and skin. She didn't believe she would ever try that, and it's absolutely disgusting. Then there was his self-harm issue, whether it was juggling razor blades or leaping on a stack of shattered glass, he seemed to always find a new method to injure himself. When he went, she was really relieved since she wouldn't have to keep an eye on him all the time to prevent him from hurting himself or going through her room and drawer of underwear. At least she believed she could unwind now that he was at the academy. It was another dull day at the academy, and Naruto sighed as he entered. Indeed, he gained some knowledge, but he had received most of his schooling from the Kyuubi and Anko. He knew a few lightning jutsus and was faster than everyone else at the academy at molding his chakra. He adored lightning strikes and the damage they caused on skin. With a single shock, he might also destroy an adversary's brain. In addition, he was fast, not chunin fast, but fast as in making, okay, he was just really fast, like jounin speed. The best part, though, was that Irika said he was the best user of taijutsu. In addition, he received the best grades when it came to practicing skills with him or battling him because the class was still somewhat terrified of him. However, as Kyuubi stated, you have already triumphed if your adversary is afraid of you. It goes without saying that he is a 500-foot tall, red-eyed fox, the Lord of Hell, and that people fear him. When he smiled at Hinata, she blushed, let out a little cry, and swiveled in her chair. Irika entered, performed his huge head jutsu, and took a seat. He appeared agitated, and Naruto saw that his clothing were creased. After giving him a little more attention, He turned to glare at Sasuke Uchiha. Their rivalry began when they were 6 years old and is still going strong, despite the fact that 2 years later, people would consider them to be the most enmity-filled of rivals. However, this was completely untrue. Although neither would acknowledge it, their rivalry did contain a tiny element of friendship. He looked at Iruka, who was now directing them, and turned away from Sasuke. Okay everyone, today we're going to go outside and have a free-for-all. It's everyone fighting each other, no groups. While most individuals appeared anxious, some, like Shikamaru and Naruto, appeared so pleased that they didn't even want to walk outside. All they wanted to do was sit there and sleep. Unfortunately, they had to go outdoors like everyone else because they were only kids. Iruka gave them additional instructions once they were in the forest, not the forest of death. Now you all have 3 hours to complete this test. The last person standing will get an hour extra training from me, and Mizuki. Iruka lifted his hand to hush the enthusiastic genins as they spoke, saying, I'll also be entering the forest, to watch over you all, in case someone takes it too far. Everyone vowed that before yelling, begin, he glanced at Naruto. To gain the upper ground before anyone else did, everyone dashed into the trees. As she emerged from the shower, Anko let out a sigh. She had just finished having a good time with Iruka. She had gone out 5 minutes after Naruto had departed, pulled poor Iruka inside her home, and told him to remove his pants. When Iruka realized he would be late, they had been moving along at a good clip. She merely hoped Naruto wouldn't discover it because she knew he loved her and didn't want to hurt his feelings. You don't have to be heartless towards someone just because you're afraid of them. She put on her trench coat and left the room with a sigh. When he saw Hinata enter his clearing slowly, the blonde-haired shinobi grinned, laughed, then lowered himself behind her and put a kunai to her throat. He was taken aback as she suddenly spun around, snatched up the kunai, and flung it into a nearby tree. She attempted to hit his right shoulder, but he flipped backwards. He reached out to kick her in the nose halfway through the flip, but she grasped the bottom of his foot and pushed it away. He fell on the ground with his flip screwed up, forming his body into a ball. He didn't have time to recover, though, for she was already attacking, launching a flurry of palm strikes at him. Grabbing her palms, he licked her lips and dropped his face to hers. After she leaped back and rubbed her lips, she became enraged and performed the 64 palms move. I can't remember the name, can you help? He was struck with all 64 palms, but he stood up and grinned at her. That felt good, now it's my turn. Recalling who he was, Hinata retreated, thinking perhaps she shouldn't have battled him. As he ran at her, she shook her head and got a Kaden ready. Damn, I forgot about that stupid shield thing. Naruto tossed some kunai at her as he leaped into the air. When she avoided them, she cheered, but when she noticed the explosion tags on them, she gasped. She whirled to do a Kaden, but it was too late since the tags caught fire and detonated, leaving her unconscious and with burns on her arms and back. Knowing that his victory was sweeter because he didn't even employ jutsu or any of his more advanced abilities, Naruto grinned. The prize was about to be awarded. He unbuttoned Hinata's jacket and dragged her corpse into the forest, making sure no one else was nearby. An hour later, As Naruto strolled into the forest, he grinned to himself. Hinata had a lovely butt and the largest breasts of the entire class. It makes sense why she wore black slacks and a fur jacket. He grinned again, then heard voices and fled into the trees. When he caught a glimpse of Sakura, Shikamaru, and Chuji, he grinned. He heard what they were saying. Yes, Shikamaru, that is a fantastic plan. Sakura exclaimed. You said it, Sakura. Chuji smiled and replied, if we get more people to work with us then we'll stand a better chance of winning. With a lazy nod, Shikamaru said, then we'll all have a fair fight. As they continued to travel, Naruto made the decision to stop by once again. Before they all grinned at him, they were shocked. Shikamaru remarked, Hey Naruto. Narrowing his eyes, Naruto dashed ahead but stumbled on the tree's roots. Chuji and Sakura both started laughing. What a klutz, cried Sakura. Yeah. Chuji concurred, I don't think we should have such a dumb freak on our team. Shikamaru even flashed a small smile of amusement. Sakura chuckled further, saying, what a dope. After snarling at them, Naruto held his head in an attempt to ignore all of the taunts. They knew it was the final error they would ever make when his turned red. As Naruto saw the bodies, he started laughing. Shikamaru's head was severed from his body, and his tongue and left eye were clearly torn out by bare hands. Like everyone else, the remainder of his body was covered in blood. Someone had smashed their fist through Shikamaru's chest, leaving a massive hole running straight through it. His limbs were splintered, with biting scars, missing parts, and protruding muscle and bone. Furthermore, Shikamaru's calves were nowhere to be found. His legs, from knee to knee, were simply gone. Chuji was less recognizable, 3/4 of his head had been removed, and pieces of his brain were visible in other places. His hand was gripping the back of his left shoulder while his right arm was bent. His insides were also burned, and there was a large burn mark on the side of his stomach. Sakura's body was no longer there. All that remained were the few fragments dangling from different branches. As he licked all the blood off his garments, Naruto had a large, nasty smile on his face and a wild expression in his eye. He was wearing his orange jumpsuit once more. Before rushing out of the woodland and toward Anko's house, he completely torched the bodies. Iruka cuddled up to Anko and grinned. Having never ventured into the forest, he immediately went to Anko's house to get another chance at her after the kids had left. Fortunately, she was present, and the two enjoyed themselves for 2 hours. Even though he was good, Anko would never tell Iruka that a little 8-year-old child outlasted him and was bigger where it mattered most. In relation to children. But while she held on to him, she said, shouldn't you go back and check on the brats? With a sparkle in his eyes, Iruka answered, well, yeah, I could, but Mizuki's there to handle any problems. After exchanging glances, they went beneath the covers. Then in that case. After 6 knocks on the door, Naruto became irate when she didn't answer. Not to mention the screams and loud moaning emanating from within. When he had had enough, he raced to Anko's room and kicked down the door. He was astonished by what he saw. Iruka was kneeling and pressing his cock on Anko. Both of them paused where they were and turned to face him. After glancing at the ground, Naruto turned back to face Anko. What's going on? Anko murmured, look kid, you're fun, and good and all, but I'm an older woman, I have my needs, that sometimes you can't fulfill. Iruka replied, yes she right, besides you're an 8-year-old, you can't possibly think that you'll satisfy an older woman. Anko winced as she watched a tear escape Naruto's eyes and said, I'm sorry, Naruto, but, we just can't do this anymore, I don't care about the agreement, you'll have to go somewhere else. I'm sorry Naruto, truly I am. Before his eyes turned red, Naruto simply grinned. When Anko noticed her fingers covered in blood, she coughed and moaned. Her left arm was shattered in 3 places, and she had 2 large gashes in her chest. That was all, though. Irika would never again engage in any sexual activity with a woman. Naruto's member was split in half when he couldn't take it out in time as he charged at them. Additionally, every bone in his legs was broken into tiny pieces. He would be unable to walk ever again. Even if he would survive, his life would be meaningless because he would be unable to enjoy himself, go on missions, or engage in any other shinobi activities. He continued to be employed at the academy. When Ibiki and some ANBU arrived to tell everyone about the deaths of 3 genin, they threw that demon, Naruto, into jail. It had taken all of the ANBU and Anko to keep him down after Ibiki seized him immediately after he had slashed Irika. However, he had fought them all and put up a fierce fight, not worrying about his injuries. All of the ANBU had been bitten and were in the hospital due to some kind of poisoning caused by Naruto's fangs. It was a deadly poison that rendered the adversary immobile, allowing Naruto to do anything he pleased to them. Anko had a suspicion that Kyuubi had created the poison in some way and caused it to seep through Naruto's teeth. God, she wished Naruto was permanently imprisoned. However, she somehow knew that wouldn't occur. Correctional cell. Kakashi, Marino Ibiki, and the Sandame were standing in front of Naruto, who was bound to the wall by his ankles and wrists. He was grinning at them, but his eyes were fixed on a long-haired, purple ANBU member in the corner. He licked his lips as she returned his gaze. "Why is this kid in here?" she asked Sandame as she turned away in disgust. He attacked and nearly killed Anko Mitarashi, Irika Umino, and several ANBU members, the professor said, lowering his cap. She gave the child a suspicious look. "This 8-year-old runt?" "Yes, don't underestimate him just because he's a little boy," Kakashi said, looking up from his book. After clearing his throat, Ibiki said, "Who's right, now Naruto, for the assault of several Umbu, Anko-san, and Irika-san, you'll be in here for 4 years." He paused and added, "There were also the 3 genin who got owned. I mean murdered, but we can't prosecute anyone because we don't know whether you did it." "Well, I guess you're going to torture me almost every day, right?" Naruto smiled slyly at them. "That's right," Ibiki said, "and Uego-san will be watching you in her free time to make sure you don't try anything. I'll at least have something lovely to gaze at." Looking at Yago with a lascivious expression on his face, Naruto muttered. With a sly smirk on her face, the ANBU said, "Well, don't count on it, because I'll be helping in your torture as well." Uego approached him in a seductive manner, put her hand up, and caressed his face before giving him a firm cheek squeeze that startled him by making him smile. "I'd love it if you did that for me," Naruto said, blowing a kiss at her. With his head still buried in his book, Kakashi was chuckling like a pervert, Sandame simply groaned, and Ibiki's eyes were amused. "Yo Cyclops, let me see that since it'll be a while before I get out," Naruto said, turning from Kakashi to his book. "I'll pay you for some of these when I get out," Cyclops said, shrugging before putting the book in front of Naruto, who then burst out laughing. "Yes, it's a deal," Kakashi said, nodding. "But you should concentrate on your current circumstances rather than the outer world." Ignoring him, Naruto said, "Start my session, trench coat." Ibiki's eye twitched, but he nodded to Uego, who returned with a bucket of ice-cold water after going outside the cell door. Turning to Kakashi, Naruto said, "You see, I'm paying attention. Now, keep in mind the agreement." Sandame whispered in his ear, "I'm sorry, Naruto. I know you've had a difficult life. When you leave, I'll make sure you never get sent back in here. Kakashi and Sandame followed him to the cell door. You're too dangerous right now. Hopefully, Ibiki will take that out of you so you can become a proficient ninja. Only Ibiki and Yuego remained in the cell with Naruto after the two ninja left. Marino removed his gloves and submerged his hands in the icy water, after which Yuego bandaged them. Who knows what FIC this is from? The head of interrogation gave Naruto a sly smile before posing the question, "Are you ready?" He scowled when Naruto continued to smile while he was still staring at Yuego, and he hit Naruto in the ribs without waiting for a response, easily shattering two of them. "That's all you got, you pussy?" Naruto asked Marino as he turned to face him. In addition to not screaming, this youngster even asked Ibiki if he was a pussy while grinning at her as if attempting to convince her of anything. Yuego's mouth fell open. As she watched, Ibiki grinned at Naruto and said, "Oh no, I got way more than that." He used his left hand to give Naruto an uppercut, and when Naruto spat out blood, a portion of his tongue, and some teeth, he grinned. However, that idiot continued to giggle while continuing to gaze at Yuego. "Holy crap, my teeth, oh my god, whatever am I gonna do?" he muttered sarcastically as he turned to face Ibiki. When his tongue had completely healed and new teeth appeared, he opened his mouth and laughed. Yuego gulped the mouthful of blood and shuddered. Yes, those 4 years were going to be long. 3 years later, Naruto will be leaving in 2 days. Time skip, I apologize, I realize. Naruto is 11 years old. When it was her turn to torture Naruto, Yuego grinned and whistled, "Ah, my favorite, the sexy Yuego, I could torture you in another way." She gagged, but she felt strange inside because the only person who had ever said that to her was an 11-year-old prisoner. She wasn't with Hey-8 because Naruto is 11 and not 12. She turned to face him and said, "Well, since you feel that way, then I'm going to give you extra punishment." She scowled when he grinned broadly, "I look forward to it, Yuego Heim." She took out her spiked whip and shook her head. When she twisted her arm, it struck Naruto in the back. She purred and put it around his neck, saying, "If that's what you Narukoan," and he grumbled but said, "Well, we could have pain sex too, if that's what you want." He smiled and said, "There you go, just let loose, if you have any stress, then come and let it out on me." Ibiki interrupted her as she was ready to speak, telling her that he was going to fetch a drink. Knowing that he frequently pulled all-nighters in an attempt to get Naruto to crack, she nodded, even if all he did was look at Yuego. She confronted Naruto after he left the room, asking, "What's your game?" Raising his eyebrows, Naruto asked, "What do you mean?" Unaware that her nose was in contact with Naruto's, Yuego leaned in closer. "You know what I mean, always staring at me, making cat calls, giving me an invitation to get rid of my problems for a little while, then now you say that I can take out my anger on you, what's the deal?" "Because you're beautiful, and I like you," Naruto said with a gentle smile rather than one that was cruel. "And since I love pain, if you want to hurt someone, then come and hurt me." "Yeah, trying to act like you care about me," she said, staring at him. With another smile, Naruto said, "I do, let me show you." He put his mouth to hers and, when she opened it, inserted his tongue. She stood there in awe as he played with her tongue and then probed her mouth. She then briefly shared a kiss with him before pulling away, her cheeks flushed. He simply grinned at her before saying, "You should go back to what you were doing." "I don't know what came over me. But if you ever do that again, I'll kill you, understand?" She retreated and smiled slightly, saying, I appreciate your concern, in your own peculiar manner. When he nodded, she swung her whip and slashed him across the chest, repeatedly, thinking of all the bullshit she ever had to deal with. When she was done, she saw that Naruto's chest, which was once clean with a few marks on it, was now bloody and disfigured. Yet he smiled at her. "Do you feel better?" When she saw that Naruto's chest was completely normal again, as if she had never touched it, Yuego shook her head and went back to the corner. Ibiki came in with oil and a lighter, and she winced as he poured on Naruto's entire body except for his head. Then, when the madman flicked on the lighter, she hissed and swiftly placed it in Naruto's pants pocket. She nodded, then watched in fascination as he struggled to lick off all the blood. However, she suddenly saw that Naruto's eyes were fixed on the wall behind Ibiki rather than on her. It is one day later, and Naruto will be leaving. He had a strict 24-hour schedule, sleeping for 3 hours, going outside to the prison grounds for 1, and being tortured for the remaining 20. Naruto smiled when he saw his friends here. Remember hallucinations? He looked behind Ibiki and saw one hitting Ibiki as if to get him to stop, so he shook his head no, telling it to leave him alone. It stopped and returned to the wall. Yuego saw him and followed his view, but saw nothing. When he shook his head, she scowled and looked again, believing she saw the outline of a hand swatting at Ibiki like a fly. She gasped and turned back to Naruto, wondering if he could control ghosts or some other spiritual force, and she continued to stare at him, but now he was staring at her, Ibiki not noticing as he continued to pour oil on him. She sighed, knowing that they couldn't hurt him. The day when Naruto leaves. When he woke up, Naruto noticed that the only person in the room was a bald man wearing a tuxedo. His eyes were black, the pupil, the iris, the entire eye was black as night. Who knows what show he's from? He approached Naruto and placed his hands on his face, and Naruto felt his energy being sucked out, realizing that he was out of breath. He stared at the man, who was also grinning at him. Ibiki swore when he saw that dumb expression still on his face, and he raised his head when Naruto began speaking. Marino and Yuego looked at Naruto, waiting to see how he would respond to the genjutsu. After giving the man another glance, Naruto noticed that he had suddenly moved to the center of the room and began speaking with him. "You're headed to hell, Naruto Uzumaki." "Thank you, I'm happy you noticed," Naruto said, nodding. "Ask me anything you want before you die," the man said, still sporting a wry smile. "I know everything, I am the Reaper." After a minute of contemplation, Naruto silently accepted Kyubi's assertion that the man was a fraud. "So, what's life all about?" "The meaning of life is killing as many people as you can and being as horrible as you can before you die," the Reaper grinned. "Of course you'd say that, you're evil," snorted Naruto. "All right," Reaper laughed, "what do you suppose life's purpose is?" Yuego listened carefully outside of the genjutsu Marino, curious to hear Naruto's thoughts as well. "I believe that each life has a unique purpose rather than that there is no meaning at all. Being Hokage is the ultimate goal for some people, while mastering every jutsu they can is the ultimate goal for others." The Reaper said, "A very good answer from someone so young. Next question," after Yuego nodded. "All right, tell me about your favorite color." The Reaper's jaw widened slightly, as did Yuego's and Ibiki's. "You ask me that out of all the things you could possibly ask?" The man said, shaking his head, "It's red, like blood." Naruto gave a nod. "All right, will you murder Ibiki for me when I die?" "Ahaha, ha, no," the man chuckled. "All right," moaned Naruto, "why is Uegoheim so gorgeous?" His voice was full of astonishment as he asked. For a brief period, Reaper remained silent. Because she simply is. All of her ancestors won beauty pageants. You say it's because of her beautiful ancestors, but I think it's her natural beauty, Naruto said, shaking his head. Yuego blushed and Ibiki gave her a sly smile before shaking her head, which the Reaper also did. Next question, she said. Naruto grinned at him and said, you realize that I'm going to be the king of hell after I die, so you'll essentially be my bitch, don't you? The lights in the room flickered as the Reaper became enraged, and he yelled, "Agich, stupid fool. I am not ruled by anyone." One more question. Naruto smirked and turned to face the corner of the room as he noticed one of his buddies running into the room, making loud sounds, just as he was ready to give him the final question after laughing. Do you see that? Yuego and Ibiki surveyed the entire circular cage, prompting the Reaper to follow suit. What are you talking about? The Reaper asked in frustration, and when Naruto turned to look behind him, Yuego swore she saw a hand with a blade in it. The Reaper's eyes widened when it saw a tall man wearing a dirty blue pair of pants, a black shirt, and a torn blue jacket. The man's face had a hockey mask, and he had a machete in his left hand. Yes, I used Jason, but I don't own him either. I like him, he's cool. The Reaper did not react when Jason's machete went through his chest, cleaving him in two. When the jutsu collapsed, the two interrogation specialists startled and briefly saw Jason staring at them before he vanished, and Naruto turned to face Yuego, his face displaying pain when he saw her hands in a seal. How could you, Yuego-Heim? I believed we had something unique. Ibiki said, I have no idea in hell what that thing was, but I don't want to know. Regardless, your time is finally up, it's time for you to leave, as she turned aside to hide her red face from him. Sup, old man? Naruto smirked as the Sandaime entered, glanced at him, and slapped his forehead. As Sarutobi glared at him, Ibiki shrugged and said, we used every torture method we could, but no jutsus as you asked. And each time we attempted to enter his head, we were expelled. Well, Naruto, I hope you learned your lesson, said Sarutobi, nodding. Yes. I discovered that if I'm going to kill someone, should do it sooner, Naruto retorted. With a groan, Sarutobi unlocked the shackles on his legs and started to do his arms, but Naruto interrupted, saying, just rip it off the wall, I want to keep these on. Sarutobi had already shot acid at the wall-mounted chain and watched it burn away while glaring at him. When Naruto heard the chains hit the floor, he looked at his wrists and moved them, testing their movement with the shackles on. It's like Liu Kang's zombie form Mortal Kombat. You know the chains on he wears. Surprisingly, he didn't fall down, instead, he just stretched his arms and grinned. It was 4 a.m, so he would go to his apartment, take a shower, get money, get to Ichiraku's, then head to the academy. He smiled as they walked outside, noticing that the village had not changed, and then he looked at Yuego before smiling at her and giving her a quick first kiss before she could do anything else. Be careful, Konoha, Naruto Uzumaki is coming back. Sticking to the rooftop so the villagers couldn't hurt him if they wanted to, Naruto grinned as he scanned the village, looking for the academy, and when he did, he was surprised to see who was opening the doors, Irika, who was in a wheelchair because he didn't have legs, and a robotic arm that was powered by his chakra attached to his wheelchair. Irika was having a hard time opening the door, while Naruto was on the roof laughing uncontrollably. Ha 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 ha, he's a cripple, ah ha ha. Go kick him out of his wheelchair, Kit, Kyubi said, laughing beside him. Irika was trying to get his wheelchair into the door when Naruto nodded and snuck up behind him and said, let me help you. Irika didn't even bother to turn around, instead, he just thanked the person, not knowing what would happen to him. Naruto pushed the wheelchair in and went down the hall, turning when Iruka told him to. He smirked and ran to the stairs at full speed, despite Iruka's pleas for him to stop. Naruto laughed, and he could hear Kyubi snickering, saying that what Naruto did was better than kicking him out of the wheelchair. Neither of them realized that they were being watched. It struck the stairs, fell down 2 floors of stairs, and then slammed right into Iruka's door, which had been moved after the injury so that he wouldn't have to climb stairs. Yuigo and Ibiki didn't appear happy, while Sarutobi just stood there in disbelief at what Naruto had done to Iruka and how he was smiling, obviously not regretting it. See, Hokage-sama hasn't changed in 4 years and is still a threat to everyone. The professional side of her knew that it was wrong and mean, but the childish side of her wanted to go there and laugh at Iruka right next to Naruto. That led her to another thought. Naruto was by all means a dangerous criminal, but he was the only one who was kind to her and the only one who dared to French kiss her without fear of the repercussions. Yuigo remained silent, and she assumed that he had changed because he probably would have killed Iruka outright if he hadn't. "I'm sorry, Hokage-sama. Could you repeat that?" The Hokage said to her, and she blinked. "I said, you are relieved, Yuigo-san. You may go home," and Sarutobi sighed, as if he were doing so frequently. "Thank you, Hokage-sama," she said, nodding. After Yuigo utilized the body flicker technique, she arrived at her house, undressed, and entered the shower, where she exhaled deeply as the hot water turned on and helped her decompress, not as well as Naruto, but it helped. Oh, she loved showers. Yuigo grabbed the shampoo and squeezed the entire bottle on top of her head, then began massaging her scalp. She washed her body, scrubbing everywhere. She may be an ANBU and have many missions, but that made her respect cleanliness even more than others. Before smashing the window and jumping out and rushing into the woods, Naruto gave a last laugh. Then he stopped and stooped over, clutching his stomach in agony. Kyubi, what's happening?" Naruto cleared his throat. "You're not going to enjoy this, but I'm adding more chakras to your system every day. You see, I made the chakra cease entering your chakra system when you were in prison because they would have killed you if they had discovered that you were gaining more of my chakra every day." "You mean?" Naruto's eyes widened. Kyubi grinned in his mind. "Yeah, it will all come rushing in at once because it has been suppressed for 4 years. This implies that you're going to have a great time." He shook his head, then he threw up the lunch he had stolen from the academy, moaned when he began to throw up blood, and stumbled through the forest, throwing up or holding his head every other second. When he hit a root, he grunted in pain, and he fell forward, hitting his head on a rock. He got up and fell back down, crawling along the ground toward a light he saw. Since it was 5 in the morning, it was fairly easy to see a bright light in the woods. As he strained to get there, Naruto moaned, "How much longer is this going to last?" He saw a picture of Kyubi shrugging and said, "I can't heal you, but it might last an hour or the entire day. Have fun, stupid fox, gotta reach house," Naruto swore. He jumped up and started running, using more of his limited energy, but he tripped on his own shoe, spun about, and landed on his right side, where a fallen tree branch was stuck in his side. "Kit, perhaps it would be best if you stayed put," the fox proposed. "Stop talking, Baka Fox," Naruto complained. When the blonde-haired shinobi finally arrived to the house, he used his remaining energy to ring the doorbell. A minute later, Yuigo, dressed only in a towel, answered the door and gasped at seeing Naruto's condition. "Yuigo Heim," he said, "didn't cough, expect to find, cough, you hear." After that, Naruto moaned and passed out, and his body dropped into Yuego's arms. Yuego then cursed and carried him inside the residence of Yuego. Yuego went into another room and returned with a damp cloth, bandages, styptics, and antiseptics. Is that it? Cleans bacteria or something. Look, I'm using my knowledge from the survival viewer from MGS3. OK. The purple-haired Anbu placed him on a blanket spread out on the floor, examined him, and found that his head was split open, that a piece of a branch was stuck in his side, and that he had numerous scrapes and bruises. Perhaps this was his punishment for what he had done to Irika. After cleaning both wounds of excess blood, applying styptics to stop the bleeding, applying antiseptic to prevent infection, and finally tying the bandages tight, she did something she wasn't sure she should have done. She leaned down and kissed him on the lips. She then got up, lifted him up without moving him, placed him on the couch with her fluffiest pillow, gave him her best blanket, and sat down at the end of the couch. After a minute, she moved the pillow and sat down, putting his head in her lap and playing with his hair. She couldn't help it, as if she had nothing else to do, and she continued to stroke him like he was her pet until she noticed that he had a slight fever, but that he could get rid of it by sleeping, so she scooted him over on the couch and lay down next to him. Her mind didn't notice that Naruto's body had turned around, so she put his arms around her, half asleep, and continued to do the same to him, even with the shackles clamped on his wrists digging into her back. Why do they say they sleep like a baby, when babies wake up every 2 hours? When Naruto woke up, his face was in Yuego's bosom. He smiled and kissed it, wishing that her clothes were gone, then carefully took off her arms that were wrapped around him for protection, and got off the couch. After looking around and realizing that he felt better, he tore off all the bandages and went into the kitchen, then proceeded to raid her refrigerator. Deciding it was time to leave, he went over to Yuego's sleeping body and, before he had a better idea, he bent down to kiss her, placing his lips on the side of her neck. Needless to say that when she wakes up, she will notice that mark on her neck. X Academy at 7 o'clock. Irika moaned and unlocked the door of his classrooms, ready for the day of the genin exams. It was a shame what happened to the Nara, Akimichi, and Haruno kids. Sure, the Haruno deserved it, Irika's mean, but the other two had so much potential. Oh well, they would have been great shinobi, it's a shame that they got murdered. He grinned as his new assistant Anko entered the room. When the Hokage visited and informed them of Naruto's imprisonment, Mizuki had been fired because he had muttered, "Thank God Kyuubi's gone," and the Hokage had heard him. Fortunately, no one else did, because Irika had used his big head of doom jutsu wisely, even when everyone was sitting quietly, and now people thought he was mean. Anko had been chosen as his assistant because they had a relationship. Yes, she married him, even though he was no longer able to please her, and he was unaware that she was cheating on him with Ibiki. As each child entered, he grinned, got up, and stopped at Sasuke. Sasuke had interpreted Naruto's imprisonment incorrectly. After the Hokage said that Naruto was too strong, he became enraged, believing that being imprisoned demonstrated one's strength. He now tried everything he could to get himself imprisoned, from burning villages to robbing homes. He was now regarded as Konoha's worst criminal, but most people were aware of his actions, so Sarutobi put him in jail and tortured him for a day. After yelling like a girl and pleading for his mother, father, and even sibling to come to his aid, Sasuke began yelling, "Help me, Tom Cruise." 1. They let him go because they believed he had had enough and was going crazy, and now things were normal, at least not anymore. However, outside, it was time for some fun, and Naruto was standing in front of Irika's door. Irika's point of view. The door kicked off its hinges and struck Kiba in the nose, costing $200. Kiba's broken nose cost $700. It is priceless to see the boy who nearly killed you, hurt your wife, and can frighten your students to death in the same room as you. While money cannot buy everything, Naruto can. Naruto entered and grinned at everyone, saying, "I'm back." After Hinata screamed and climbed beneath the desk, pleading with him to stop, Naruto looked at her and laughed before slowly making his way down the stairs toward Irika, who was backing up into the corner with Anko, who put her hand to her chest. He stopped in front of them and turned to face the class, saying, "See, everyone, this is power. If you're 12 years old, and a special jounin, and an ex-chunin fear you, then you know you got respect." Sasuke looked at him and nodded when Naruto looked at him, then turned back to face Anko and Irika. He smiled at Anko and stepped up to kiss her on the lips, which she did, happy that he wasn't going to try to hurt her again. Irika glared at Naruto but sat there, powerless to do anything, until he dragged her into the closet, where they sat in shock as they heard Anko repeatedly yelling out Naruto, and then her pleas of pleasure turned to cries of pain as she pleaded with him to stop. After a few minutes, Naruto left the room with blood all over his body. Scary description of dead body ahead. Naruto grinned and took his old seat. All of the students, with the exception of Naruto and Hinata, who was still cowering beneath the desk, got up and went into the closet. Immediately, the sound of 20 people vomiting could be heard, and Irika appeared with an unreadable expression on his face, the expression that most people gave Jason: "You know you're going to die, so why even try to escape?" Anko's body was in the closet. As Irika and the students were in there sobbing, Naruto walked over to Hinata and pulled her out from under the table. Her stomach was open, her heart was gone, her breasts were torn off, one was in the hole in her face, the other was in between her thighs, her intestines were hanging out of the small gash in her abdomen, and her throat had a deep slit, almost like Naruto was trying to cut her head off. Her eyes were gone, and her tongue was hanging out of her left ear. After carefully guiding her to the closet and revealing Anko's body, he grinned and said, "You'll be worse than her if you tell anyone." Hinata fell to the ground, but nodded, showing that she understood. He smiled at her, "Good." After tearing off her jacket and placing her on Irika's table, he grinned at her for 10 minutes before snatching up a headband and grinning at Irika, asking, "Do I pass?" Irika gave the quickest nod he could. Naruto had officially passed and became as a shinobi.